today's been strange. Really strange. I feel like a stranger in completely foreign skin. But at the same time, it also feels like maybe I've always been this way. I don't know how to describe it, so I won't try. I'll tell you about this strange day instead. First, I woke up in the same spot I'd fallen into, only I was surrounded in something different. Instead of the flowery scent that had first drawn me in, there was a new smell. Whatever was wrapped around my shoulders felt warm compared to the state of chill I'd lost consciousness to. I barely remember crawling into the grove of white flowered trees. Now I know they're called myrtles, thanks to my new friend. But I can't get ahead of myself. I've learned I do that too in the last 24 hours, so I'm trying to make up for lost time with bad habits I developed prior to my memory's reach, while the difference was still fresh. So I woke up, and my body was still kind of shaking from the cold, but it wasn't as bad as it had been before. That's when I looked down to find a dirty blue blanket wrapped around my shoulders. Not only was it the source of warmth, but it was also the root of the stale, rotten smell of something dying. I tightened my grip around the fabric as I sat up. Its left side all but crumpled in my hand. It was stiff, and the wrinkles my fingertips traced felt permanent, like the leathery skin of someone who'd spent their entire life in the sun with no protection. A heat-dried raisin or unbroken leather gloves. A catcher's mitt that's only been worn once. New, never-run-in Nikes. It's strange how these comparisons come to me while I'm describing the situation, but as it happened, it felt as though it was the first time it had ever been experienced by anyone. Now that I know more about, well, everything, I realize I'm not the only one who feels that way. And there's actually a term for it. Self-centeredness. Apparently, I've become very good at it up until now. Even if I can't remember the how or why I got that way, apparently it's a common trait that holds us humans together these days. At least that's what my new friend told me. And I have to say, the more I've seen, the more I've become torn on the opinion. Anyway, see? I did it again. Made it all about myself. Well, I looked across the way and it was dark. So apparently I'd been sleeping for a while. The trees were all but shadows. I could barely make out the large leaves and the white flowers. But it was beautiful. I could see the canopy of stars resting above them, like the perfect reflection inside of a larger reflection. There was a fire burning under a discreet, clearly handmade covering. It was full of all different sizes of holes. The smoke leaked out of each separately, and slowly flittered away and disappeared. Apparently, the invention was crucial to keep the park popos from finding us and throwing a fit. Made sense. It was pretty ingenious either way, and it held in the heat. However he did it, the smoke seemed to go its separate ways as it leaked from the enclosure, and by the time it reached the thick canopy, I couldn't even see it. Across the fire, my new friend sat poking at the embers with a stick. He smiled the most genuine smile at me. Even then, in those first moments, he seemed harmless as a kitten. I hadn't thought to imagine him as a potential danger. He apologized for not having something more appropriate for a pretty lady to wear and told me I could call him Abram. Until then, I hadn't even noticed the fabric under the blanket. It looked like a nightgown. The large front pocket could have held 2 full kittens at least. The whole thing drooped and cascaded around me. I thanked him for letting me borrow it in the first place and promised to give it back as soon as I figured out who and where I was from. He told me about the park and asked me if I remembered anything. I told him no. And he didn't push, thankfully. The old man really loved the park. He told me all about it, said it was the prized gem at the center of the most important city in existence. I'm not kidding you when I say I was out of it. I didn't remember a single thing, and for some reason, at that point in our conversation, I was imagining an entire city full of bush dwellers and tree people like Abram. That's how much I'd forgotten about everything. Houses, buildings, skyscrapers, wires and power lines and who's-its and what's-its. I'd apparently forgotten all about them somehow. For the first 3 hours of my re-entrance into consciousness, my mind was pretty simple. All those hours ago, I felt content, warmer than I had been, and after scooting in even closer to the fire cover's makeshift opening, I'd even been warm enough to drift back into sleep until morning. When I woke up, I was alone. There was no sign of the fire, but the phantom of smoke left behind on my blanket. There was no sign of my strange companion. It was like he'd vanished, and I was here all alone, and I'd always been there alone. The only thing left to mark my experience as not a dream was the half-eaten can of beans he'd left next to me. The covering hadn't been taken completely off. He'd closed the round top to keep the animals and insects off. Resting on the top was a mostly clean plastic fork. I didn't think twice at diving into it. My stomach growled at me as if I'd never eaten before. I couldn't pry the can open fast enough, and I shoveled and sucked every last bean into my mouth before I put it back down. I barely chewed, but if you've ever eaten beans from a can, I think you know you barely have to. Anyway, that was the beginning of my day. It all started out simply. I waited for a while for my friend to come back, but he didn't, so I wandered off, thinking maybe if I did what Abram had suggested the night before and go for a walk around, maybe I'd remember something, anything about where I'd come from. After looking around the space, I figured any other grove of trees or bushes wouldn't be much different than this one. And all I remembered from the outside world was the gray rivers that didn't move a single bit. Even under the torrential rain, it was like whatever they were made of made the perfect way for the droplets to gather, like a rockless waterbed the water could never absorb into. Come to find out, these weren't as crazy cool as I thought to begin with. They're just sidewalks, and apparently they're everywhere. Abram had told me I might have amnesia, and for some reason outside of my memory, something had happened that caused me to forget everything. Maybe I bumped my head, he said, or maybe I'd been mugged and robbed. Would explain why I was left naked in a park, but that thought felt too invasive, so I let it go. Just go walk around, Missy, he'd offered after listening to my nothing burger of personal details and the experience leading him to find me in the trees. So I did that, and man, did I figure out something about my kind. I couldn't remember basics. Remember that. And remember, I'm only human, and apparently not a very good one, based on where I found myself. Nah, Missy, doesn't mean that. Even the best ones fall down sometimes. Just gotta dust off, that's all. I liked Abram's version better than what appeared to be the general opinion at first. So this was my version of dusting myself off in the wake of some pretty poor impressions. While walking around, I had people actively move as far away from me as they could on the sidewalk in order to avoid coming into contact or having to look at me. And compared to the next example, I would have taken that. I had a woman's upper lip nearly run away on one side of her face in a very unpleasant display of what felt like distaste. When I made the face back, just to try it out really, it came with the impression of something sour. Or maybe something I wouldn't put in my mouth again if given the choice. made me resent her a little for a split second. I almost felt as if I could hear her thoughts ringing in my head as she left me behind to ponder why she'd offered such pointed attention. But I didn't have too long to think about it because another passerby jumped in to not so silently judge in a new way. She stuffed a few crumpled pieces of paper into my front pocket and told me to go get myself a bra and some pants. Now that I know what those are, it only adds to my humiliation. After feeling enough of what I now understand to be shame, I decided to watch the streets and sidewalks from afar while trying to figure it all out somewhere out of the way. I didn't know where to begin. Everything felt so foreign to me. I wasn't even sure how to interact properly. So I stayed back from the main stretches and watched, hoping to see some maybe good examples and figure out the differences between them and me. It felt safer lurking in the shadows after enough expressions left me feeling a little upset. Who were they to judge me? After a while of sitting there by myself, I came to a few conclusions. A. Not everyone lived the way Abraham did. This was something of a relief to me. I found myself drawing my fingers through my locks, tousling them to be sure they didn't look as out of sorts as the rest of me. B. The biggest difference between me and everyone else was definitely in smell. I smelt gross. I ate some fried pie when halfway through the day I was forced to admit I downright stunk. I was finding it hard to be around myself by the time I found a lull in the crowded vein to scurry back to my hole in reality. I took the first opportunity that I could. C. I have no idea what I'm doing. How would I find new fabric to fit in? Where in this fabric did I fit? I didn't come from nowhere. That wouldn't make sense. So, where did I come from? These were the thoughts that kept me company all the way back to the park. It was a sunny day. The sky was the kind of cloudless blue that makes your heart skip ahead of you, and yet I felt exposed in the open green field. I stood out horribly against the emerald with my pale skin and severely stained pastel covering. I looked up at the ocean of blue, spinning in a small circle. If the fabric I was wearing hadn't been so faded, it might have blended right in. If only I had wings. The thought had crossed my mind a few times as I'd fled from the busy streets in the direction I'd come from. It was the only thing I knew. I sat down hard and let my eyes stray. The little hill I'd found my way to rolled into the perfect play arena. What a beautiful day. If I hadn't felt like such junk, I might have joined in with the little bodies running in circles around each other. Or maybe I wouldn't. How would I know what I would do if I didn't remember a darn thing about who I was before I woke? I was basically an infant with full capabilities, and man, did it feel rotten. The most perfect breeze of wind brushed through my hair. I breathed in. I can figure this out, right? The question flowed naturally in and out of my mind.
Yes, you can, little bee.
A rogue thought tossed back at me. It had been so vivid, I had to open my eyes and literally found myself asking, did that come from inside of me? The inkling had been familiar. The tone had felt like an old friend. After a moment of quiet, the impact had faded. And suddenly I remembered the echo of the small voice that had led me to the myrtle trees to begin with. It was one and the same. I almost burst with excitement. Are you still there? I asked. The question echoed through my mind as I waited for its answer. Silence. Nothing. No response. I immediately felt silly, I'll tell you that. You know you've reached a strange point in life when talking to yourself is the best or only option you have. I looked around to see people playing together in their own ways. One couple was positioned in the shade of a massive oak. The light shadows danced over their external coats beautifully as one sank to a knee to capture the perfect angle with his "It's a camera." There it was again. The voice had entered yet again to fill a blank in the equation. There. Isn't this fun? Okay, I think I'm getting the hang of this. So, camera. So, the counterpart to the cameraman was posted directly in the center of the giant snarled base, completely ignoring the arms extending above them like leafy wings, protecting them from potentially too much of a good thing. The sun was out in full force. The flecks of light that leaked through the canopy above them seemed to dance all around them. I fell in love with the scene until I started looking too closely. The faces she was making were strange to me. I tried to mirror them, and they really meant a whole lot of nothing. It was like the Babylon of expressiveness. I found my eyes wandering out of pure confusion and then disinterest. Just as my eyes parted way with the pair, they were snatched again by her conspirator. As soon as she was busied figuring out her next position, the lens strayed to a scene up the way. A light flashed from the front of it once, twice, 3 times, before rushing back to the main scene. I had to laugh. Apparently I wasn't the only one who hadn't been drawn in fully by the charade being shaded by the oak, as it protected the sky and the sun from having to view the indecency. And then a laugh echoed from inside of me. Nature pretty much hates inauthenticity. There's no real place for it. It usually just gets spit out mostly. Interesting. I chewed on the inkling before swallowing it whole. It rang true. I shifted into something less pretentiously playful. 3 children helping each other to climb to the top of a dome of metal bars at the far end of one side of the field. They looked so small from my vantage point. Tiny little field mice exploring their world one game at a time. I found myself cheering up again as I watched them. I got lost in the scene momentarily. Isn't it interesting, the difference between? Where do you think the division happens? My eyes rolled back to the acorn couple, making a scene under the bored oak. She was hopping around from one foot to the other, kicking up the back heel of whatever foot left the ground. I felt so conflicted. Part of me wanted to get on board. It was cute what she was doing. But something inside, that same voice, kept chirping the same thing again and again, distracting my view. Synthetic. It's all fake. It's just a show. I saw the vivid image of a cherry pie, steaming and smelling great. And then, under the first layer of gooey insides, were poisonous wild berries. Nature's favorite laxatives. Perfect for backed up bears coming out of hibernation, but in the hands of an unwitting taker, the aftermath might not be worth the initial enjoyment of the first few bites. My mind had strayed. When I came to and the scene before me unblurred, the guy with the camera was on his own. I must have been lost in my imagination for longer than I'd thought, but he was flipping through something on the back of the camera, fully absorbed. I looked around for the second character, and she was nowhere to be found. My curiosity spiked. The field surrounding them was empty. I looked back to the metal dome once full of children, and distant laughter snatched me, taking me down the way from the dome structure to another full of ramps, ledges, spirals. What is all that? There's slides and stairs. It's playground equipment. The three I'd first spotted, along with others, rushed around inside the sand boundary lines, taking turns chasing one another, as if they'd always been friends. I closed my eyes to soak in the gleeful squeals and laughter more fully. What a beautiful day. I took a deep breath, enjoying the peaceful quiet under the tree shielding me. I liked this place more than the busy streets. I ran my fingers over the spiky hair of the close-cut grass at either side of me, enjoying the flecks of light rays leaking through the leaves of the canopy above me. A distant horn blasted at the same time that my stomach rumbled. Apparently the leftover beans were wearing off. I could feel the growing hollowness in my center, and for some reason, it fit right in. There were a lot of pieces missing in my life. So which one was I really hungry for? Food. Duh. First things first. My eyes grazed over the rolling greens, half looking for relief and half just browsing. After all my perusing, I hadn't bothered to look to the hill directly next to me, where a sweet little scene was unfolding. A little family setting up a checkered red and white piece of fabric. The term caught my attention because of my earlier question while I was still on my way back to this place, I'm guessing. But this is where things get strange. As I'm sitting there watching this precious pod move around each other in what seemed like perfect harmony, gathering things from a metal pod in the gravel arena beyond them. It's a car. Gathering things from a car in the gravel arena beyond them to bring it back and place it strategically on some spot of the blanket they'd set out. It reminded me of little ants collecting and gathering for a feast. The two youngest children were playing a game of gathering grass into piles. I'm almost certain they were constructing some kind of house. After a short time of this, one gathered a small stick and tore off a corner from a napkin at the top of a pile of them and pierced two corners of it through, making a flag of sorts and sticking it straight into the top of his grass castle before proclaiming his was the winner. The other seemed to protest, and his tone seemed close to tears. I huddled my legs under myself like a turtle pulling into its shell as I watched, all but disappearing beneath the oversized shirt. Tears came to my eyes over what happened next. A new expression. When I mirrored it, I felt a warm buzzing in my heart, one that ignited when the child with the flag retracted his statement, taking it back completely to affirm he'd misjudged. "Henry, see? You've won it. I think yours is bigger. See?" And with the flag, it really was. I smiled through my leaking eyes, wiping away the tears with a fist while the two clapped gleefully at the new decree. The man and woman standing above them looked at each other with an expression that said basically anything that needed to be. Look what we made. I could almost hear the exchange in my mind when I mirrored their facial expressions, now that I'm imagining it. My stomach growled again, as if grabbing for center stage once more. Self-centered, I thought crossly, crossing my arms over my belly and squeezing to keep it wrestled into place. All the while, I'd been distracted. I hadn't taken notice of the third, who appeared to be somewhere between the other two in age. He was standing close to the car. I found him in the shadows of it when my eyes finally caught him, and the little being was staring straight into me. I was surprised at the severity of his attention. I felt like a butterfly pinned to the bottom of a box. Suddenly, the 100 faces who'd paid me attention in a poor fashion flashed to the front of my mind. I quickly looked away, letting my attention stray back to the field, and then to the playground, suddenly feeling a burning in my cheeks. I shouldn't have been watching them. How uncomfortable. Poor kid probably thought I was some weirdo. Would have been an easy assumption to make. But the world is full of surprises, So there I sat, trying to distract myself from the fact that I was no longer a fly on the wall. Something small had taken notice of me, and now the whole scene was bound to unravel. Send me running again for sanctuary where no one would have to smell me. I stuck my nose into the fabric before pulling away with an expression dangerously close to the one the woman had worn as she stuffed paper into my pocket. Mind you, I didn't know what it was yet. And finally, the distraction came in the form of a single thought. I needed to find new fabric to wrap myself in.
You need new clothes, Bee. That's what they're called. Clothes, pants, shirts, fabrics you wear.
1,000 pictures flashed through my mind, bearing examples until I thoroughly understood. I was sitting there, doing my best to not stare, but my frustration was building over the thought that somewhere out there I might have a family, a pod like that. It made sense at first, but then I thought of my new friend. Maybe I didn't. Abraham didn't. Maybe not everyone did have one. Maybe I didn't, and that's how I ended up lost, alone, and memoryless in the middle of a park in a rainstorm. That didn't seem like something a family would allow you to do. It was all looking a little bleak under the spotless sky when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I straightened and looked back toward the picnic havers, only to see the one who'd been staring standing right next to me. His little hand hadn't left my shoulder. His eyes were the same kind of watery as mine had been while watching his siblings partaking in kindness. Without a word, he handed me a slice of a quadruple-decker sandwich, bigger than his little hand could hold without the napkins it was wrapped in. As if to thank him for itself, my stomach sounded loudly between us. I took the sandwich, tears in my eyes again. "Thank you," I breathed. "You're welcome," he chirped happily. "Randy!" A glance past him revealed his mother's sweet face, full of concern. She had a hand crossed over her waistline, while the other shielded her eyes to see the scene more clearly. "I'm so sorry," she clucked. "Randy, leave that poor girl alone." He looked back at me, suddenly unsure of himself. "Thank you, really, thank you," I said again more soundly. My free hand automatically reached for the little one on my shoulder. I gave it a squeeze. He smiled so big his eyes lit on fire with it. Tears squeezed from the corners of my eyes as I watched him rush away. I waved to his mother in his wake, thanking her silently with my lips and my heart. I watched her gather him under her wing while she waved back before turning to usher him to the rest of the group. She had a sweet smile. I lifted my sandwich in a salute when he turned a final time, craning his neck to get a final glimpse of me as his mother birded him to the spread of tasty treats they'd laid out over the blanket. I wiped the tears rolling down my face as I wriggled myself to the opposite side of the tree to give them some privacy. And myself. I didn't feel comfortable having them watch what I was about to do to that sandwich. I was watching the sandwich in front of me so intently, I missed the shadow looming just beyond my nose. I couldn't help it. Have you ever been that hungry? If not, I'd highly recommend it, for the simple fact that everything tastes sweeter in the aftermath. The smell of different meats and vegetables overpowered everything in me. It was beautiful. And just as I went to take the first big bite, "Excuse me, miss." A voice sliced the moment like a serrated knife through warm bread. I froze above the tasty morsel, mouth wide open. I was literally salivating over the bacon, lettuce, and tomato juices that had already leaked onto my tongue under the pressure of my fingers. I looked at the face who'd found me, with my jaw unhinged like a feeding snake. I almost groaned as I took the gift away from my mouth, politely. It was the man with the camera. He was holding it close to himself, his eyes full of expectation. Hello? His sheepish smile seemed genuine. I had no choice but to reciprocate. He threw out a hand as if not sure what else to do, while cradling his possession close with the hand left behind the gesture.
He really cares about that thing.
I nodded at the inkling, while I looked from his face to his camera to his hand about 3 times each. I extended mine to meet his in the middle, not sure what else to do. My eyes welled up at the warmth of the communion. It had been the second kind gesture to happen to me all day, and both had happened in the matter of minutes. I'd been approached twice by people completely unrelated, without reproach. I felt strangely nurtured, less ravished and starving for the sandwich in my hand, and more pleasantly hungry for the interaction at hand. The man shook it fervently. What a strange greeting. The thought came to me. My face cracked an unsure grin. Looking back, I know I could have done better. I cozied up quickly to the relief seeping in through the friendly expression, feeling more sure of myself. Hello? My voice cracked from lack of use. I cleared my throat and tried again. Hello? I smiled more. He chuckled and crouched uphill from me, leaning against the tree. For a moment, he sat watching me as if deciding which question to go with. I could almost hear him thinking through his eyes. I didn't know what else to do, so I followed my heart and took a bigger bite than I meant to. Fully committed, I chewed, growing more curious over his reason for approaching as the pause extended. Had he seen me watching them too? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There was a warmness in his tone I trusted immediately. I nodded and then shook my head, immediately backpedaling as I chewed through the bite faster so I could give a better response. I have nowhere else to be, I said behind a polite hand and chipmunk cheeks stuffed with half-chewed crumbs. So you're not really interrupting anything. I finished as reassuringly as I could. I'm sorry. I didn't like the word the way he'd used it, or the child's mother for that matter. It didn't seem to fit properly, but I didn't say anything. Instead, I closed my eyes and didn't think at all, just relishing the bite. Well, in that case, thank you for your time. He paused. I pretended not to notice him looking me over. He was like a curious otter sizing up a new critter. He didn't seem dangerous, so I continued to eat in peace, enjoying the building feeling of fullness gathering in my belly and bleeding outward into the rest of me. He lifted the camera. Can I show you something? It was like he knew. I'd been so curious about what he'd been looking at on the back of that thing, and it was a screen. He shifted it toward me. The scene that met my eyes melted my entire spirit to warm goo. I nearly choked on my bite as I sucked in rogue crumbs. Again, tears welled up. Between the two gifts, I felt fuller. The picture was incredible. I looked back at him, slowly taking my hand away from the tool. Sorry, I rasped, offering my grubby crumb-covered fingertips for him to see. They'd been the culprit of the marks they'd left behind. He laughed. No worries. That's why I keep this thing. He pulled a silk square from his pocket and caressed the smudge points with care. My name's Dalton. He smiled. I'm a photographer. Have you heard of the Emerald City Herald? I shook my head while wiping crumbs from the corners of my mouth. Well, you must be new around here, he laughed, extending me a card. Dalton Smith, lead photographer, illustration specialist. Sounded important. Under all that were a bunch of numbers and things that didn't make sense to me at first. As if in answer to my curiosity over what they might mean, his pocket lit up. He pulled a colorful glass screen from it and touched a green button on the face of it before holding it up to his ear. He extended a finger to me, as if instructing me to wait. Hey George, I'm gonna have to call you back. Is that alright? He nodded.
It's a phone, little bee.
He turned slightly away from me as I dug into my sandwich further.
It's a phone, little bee. Cell phone. It's a communication device. It basically does what we're doing now, but between two people from far away. You use it to talk to each other.
The inkling buzzed so clearly, I had to look around to confirm it was inside me.
How many more times are you going to do that? Don't you know me by now? I've literally talked to you more than anyone else. Well, except Abram, maybe.
Abram. I thought of him again. I wondered if anyone had offered him a sandwich today. The growling in my belly had subsided, and I didn't feel hungry anymore. So I rewrapped the sandwich half in the napkin the child had brought it in. Tomato juice had made it tender in some spots. Its outer coating went from pure white to covered in stains, like my own. I smiled at the idea of it. What really mattered was on the inside of the napkin. Sorry about that. I smiled back, dismissing it. Dalton lifted the cell, breaking the spell between me and my internal voice. I suddenly wondered if everyone else had one. And yes was the resounding response, but then again, that most don't even know it. They never really hear it the way that I was experiencing it. I decided to keep it to myself, along with my predicament, as much as possible. That was my boss. He replaced the communicator in his pocket, and we were in communion again. So that picture I showed you, what do you think of it? I've never seen anything like it, I answered honestly. I really hadn't. I thought the same thing. I'm glad you feel that way. I'd like to use it in an editorial about... He paused. Well, I'm not sure what exactly, but that really captured something, and I'm pretty sure it might cure the whole city of any dysfunction it might be experiencing. I waited for him to go on because I really didn't have any idea what he was going on about yet. What did it have to do with me? Okay, I prompted. All this talk about bosses and places I'd never heard of. I nodded my head and tried to play along. Well, for me to use the picture, I need your permission, he stated. Since you're the focal point of the picture? My permission? To do something with something he'd captured? How strange. I shrugged intuitively, nodding my head at the same time. Great. So, for the record, that's a yes, right? Yes, you can use it. He was genuinely excited as he pulled a small square of paper out, same as the one he'd handed to me before. He slipped a pen out from somewhere on his person and scribbled between us. And the last thing, I'll need your name and contact information, he finished with a look of concern before his warm, open expression returned. I don't know what all that other stuff is, but my name is Beatrice. At least I think it is.
Stop giving away your details, little bee. You're showing your treasury. Stop. You've said enough.
Again, my inner voice piped in so loudly. With its warning, I had to force myself not to look around for the culprit.
That's better. You're learning.
It teased. He laughed. Contact information? I think he realized I was serious at that point because he sobered up a little bit. Well, what's a good way for me to get a hold of you? Well, here, I guess, I answered candidly. At this point, I could literally visualize myself face-palming.
Just give him the rights. That's all you need to do, little bee. Don't ask questions. You'll know what it means.
You can have the rights to the picture. No worries. I don't really need anything out of it.
No. He's gonna offer you something. It's a gift. Like the sandwich. Only this gift can buy you other gifts. It's like an IOU that you can spend anywhere you want to.
I wiped the funny look off my face and stood up. I reached out my free hand naturally to assist him. He hesitated and then took it. Well, I have to put you on the company's payroll so we can cut you a check. Where would I send that to?
A check? What
the heck is that now? Is that the gift? What is it cut out of? A flood of images and scenes flew into my mind until I knew exactly what they were. I grew excited. I was finally figuring out how this worked. Ask, receive. Ask, receive. Input, output. Input, output. I would take cash. I don't need anything official. But seriously, Dalton, you took the picture. You're the one who captured the moment. I just got a sandwich at the right time, because, man, was I hungry. That's good enough for me. The words flew out of my mouth before I could check them. I watched my internal self take a bow and disappear. He laughed. All right, Beatrice, have it your way. He lifted half his backside off the ground and reached underneath it, extracting a leather square as if it were an egg he laid. I still have to smile at the imagery, although I know now it was wallet, and they're usually kept in some form of pocket at all times. Anyway, he opened the billfold and pulled out the spitting image of the gift I'd imagined in my mind. 20s on all corners, just as I had imagined it, while my internal voice was instructing me on how to receive it.
Exactly. Good, Beatrice. Now you're getting it. Listen to me when you don't know. You have to ask, though. I can't reach you like this when you're afraid or angry. Come to me with your questions. Expect answers. I'm your friend, the only full-time ally you have.
I nodded at the internal instruction as Dalton divvied out 10 crisp green bills. So, can this buy me new clothes? Can this buy me new fabrics for my body? While he was busy, I looked over his clean, fresh attire, longing for the freedom it seemed to come with. They're called clothes, Bee.
Don't call them fabrics in public. They'll think you're simple. Keep it simple. Call them clothes.
I felt simple. I felt like a wildcat, stuck in the rapids, clinging to rocks and fallen trees wherever it could.
Money equals current. See? Get it?
The voice faded into a giggle.
Current. See. Currency. See the current.
A flood of transactions poured through me, again enlightening me on how its system worked. He held the money out to me. Thank you, I breathed. I was suddenly overcome by thoughts of what I might put myself into next. I thought of the girl Dalton had been taking pictures of, her pretty white fab clothes, how they'd flowed around her so beautifully, like my oversized shirt, but like it was meant to be.
Dress, Beatrice. It's a dress.
My inner voice whispered. I reached out and clenched my fist around the currency, accidentally crumpling its perfection. I wanted a dress, and I would find one. If today had proven anything to me, it was that anything was possible at any moment, good or bad. It was simply there for the asking, just waiting for any kind of attention. I'm sorry if it seems like not enough, but it's all the cash I have on me right now, Dalton was saying. It's perfect. I cut him off, while still imagining the dress I might get my hands on. Maybe I'd even have enough left over for another sandwich. I was tugged free of my reverie and pulled into my new accomplice's expression. He seemed worried, and I didn't like it. I wanted to help. I lifted the money back toward him, suddenly feeling responsible for it. I don't want to take all you have. I'll just accept part of the commission if we happen to run across each other again. How about that? If it makes you money, it makes me money. The words fell from my mouth without a thought. I only felt a tiny drop of sadness over parting ways with the money and the idea of a dress I'd never seen that came with it. I extended my fistful of money. No. Sorry, Beatrice. That's not what I meant. I can get more. You keep it. He chuckled and shook his head. Okay, thank you for being thoughtful, but that's yours to keep. Consider it a down payment, but are you here often? it's my home. The thought crossed my mind as I glanced around. Yes, I am. I smiled and nodded. And that was that. The friendly photographer left the park with a promise to return, along with a copy of the article and a follow-up payment.
I told you I'd take care of you,
the voice inside confirmed as I left my place on the little knoll.
I keep my promises, always.
The smallness of the voice melted into an echo that resonated endlessly through me. I skipped all the way back to the myrtle grove. Abram joined not long after. I told him about the whole day as he listened intently and chewed excitedly over the half sandwich I'd saved for him. His eyes seemed to glow more and more brightly as the story unfolded, until finally, as he licked his fingers after swallowing the final bite, he said one thing. Well, little birdie, you keep up these things and you're gonna find yourself some new wings before the old ones even get a chance to catch up to you. Just be careful, you're not getting in with wolves. Those people love little birdies who can't see the teeth through the wings they offer him. I appreciated what Abram said. I thought of all the people who'd walked past me earlier in the day without really seeing me.
What he said is true.
My inner voice confirmed. Anyone who can capture life happening has an eye for it. Take that into consideration with you too, little dove. I can't explain it, but while we were sitting around the fire, talking and laughing, something shifted in me. After reflecting on everything and sharing it with another warm heart, I can't wait to see what tomorrow brings. To be continued. Hey, thanks for joining in for this chapter or episode of Paradise Lost. I'm hoping to have at least one more episode from this series out each week. If you enjoy it, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Any interaction makes this so much more fun for me. I really have fallen in love with these stories, and the longer I spend time with them and get acquainted with the characters, the more I just fall in love with them. So I hope it has the same effect on you, and I hope this brought a little bit more light to your day. Have a beautiful week, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye!